I still feel as though the text you sent me is struggling between what the hell is a path and what the hell is a concession. We get that it's saga versus resolve. The question is, so what? And for a bit there in the previous draft, it was about destiny. Paths go toward your destiny, concessions go against it or distract you from it. The destiny thing, I personally think is, again, over-purposing the character, especially for an existential game where, where am I right now? What do I want right now? Is something that can maybe be better suited to right in the midst of that choice and nowhere else. So, yeah, what is the difference between a path and a concession? And I like that business about, your soul will grow or your soul will, this is a good thing about you. This is a bad thing about you. That makes a lot of sense. And as I recall, though, how does taking a path mean that your soul darkens more? Is that where you wanted the blight, and why?
No, you would originally, or how it is now, right. you tag a path.
I know.
Or you tag a concession.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that it doesn't associate soul darkening with concession specifically.
Right. Yeah, it could be path or concession.
Right. So that's another reason why I found it to be very muddy. But at the moment, let's say that you have this choice between path and concession, and right now it is specifically saga versus resolve, if I'm not mistaken. Right. If you take a lot of concessions, you're playing the character, for lack of a better word, toward their worser self, right? But you're able to stay up, you're able to take your rests. But you can't use your saga to improve unless you take rests anyway. So that, again, creates kind of a crossing of those two paths. So either you take a bunch of concessions and some saga, or you take a bunch of concessions. There's no saga-only way to play. Or, mainly saga way to play. Especially if you're exhausting everything all the time. So I think, does that make sense too? That we've got kind of a crisscross there that's very hard for the players to parse. They were saying, wait a minute, obviously we need both saga and resolve, because we need the resolve to rest, and then we need the saga to improve with. But that would mean that you've got to offer that choice all the time. I mean, all the fucking time. Just throw in the choice. We do a little bit and you throw the choice. You do a little bit, you throw the choice. We've just got to always be, racking these things. And so I found they were right. I mean, for their first rest, they only needed one resolve. That's fine. But if you want a situation where you are really, really stroking your chin and saying, I really want to do this, but we really need a rest, how much is a rest a tactical decision and how much is it just a pacing mechanism? If it's a pacing mechanism, then if you can just take a rest pretty much whenever, it's so tricky. I mean, this is the problem. If you are getting tons of resolve because you're getting tons and tons of choices, then it's a meaningless mechanic because you'll always have enough for a rest. If, on the other hand, rests are few and hard to come by, then you got to take it. You've always got to take it. You've always got to ignore saga, ignore your paths, because we've got to have that rest. So I found it I know it's a fundamental aspect of the game, and I don't want to go in and say, scrub on that level. You do want people to have paths and concessions. You do want them to be making a choice between them on personal, a basis. I want my character to be like this. That seems right for my character to be encountering right now. But you also want it to be a tactical decision of always wanting resolve and always wanting saga, and not being always able to get both. That's a very tough row to hoe, to have that choice play double duty on that. And I don't have a specific recommendation. I'm just pointing that out as right now, that's the primary conundrum for the Doomsmith and for the players, particularly if you don't want the Doomsmith basically forcing them down the path that they want. The Doomsmith has a pretty good idea of how they want this to turn out, and they're just going to manage the available things. I mean, you want it the other way around. You want the Doomsmith to be responding to the player's decisions.
Right.
I think you need to free up the path and concession choice. You need to free it up.
How so?
Well,
what do you mean by free up?
That not making it sort of a if you do this, then you get that. If you do that, then you get this. I know your diagram was based on that, right? Your whole diagram was based on if I take paths, if I take concessions, which is fine. But it is quite likely that you could actually divorce that from rests. And say, saga beefs you up, resolve gives you recoveries, and just have that be that. The idea that you have to get to a rest in order to benefit from the saga is really, I think, what I'm talking about. The idea that you have to actually even have a fictional rest in order to benefit from resolve. If you take concessions, you simply recover faster. Done. Resolve is your recovery. You get resolve, and you can bank it, you can, work with it. I thought one thing that was kind of interesting, tell me if I have this right, because this was a little tricky in the text. As I understand it, and we're going to set aside the issue of blights for the moment, you'll see us wrestling with that when you listen to this to the session. And I knew what I thought, and I said, this is how we do it. And everybody kept lawyering their way out of it. And I said, shut up, we're doing it this way.
Okay.
The point was that if you, let's say we've just come out of a rest, right? So we haven't had any rests yet. We're good. You need one resolve to take a rest. And my understanding is that you only need one resolve from one player, and everybody can have a rest.
No, each person.
Well, you see, that's the tricky thing. That means that every single person has to have a point of resolve even to get to your first rest. So that means they have to have picked concessions. So that means everybody feels as though, come on, where's my choice? I've got to throw 3 choices out there. First of all, I've got to throw out at least one choice per person, and they have to each pick a concession, or else we can't have a rest.
That is one thing, I guess, a little confusing. It changed. Like before, everyone had to do it together, and then that was divorced. So just a character just rests on their own. So if you have it, your character rests, and you don't have to wait for everybody else. So that's different.
So it sounds as though you're grading toward what I was talking about, which is that if you have resolve yourself, then you get to have recoveries.
Right.
Yeah, you'll see that we kind of played a hybrid, sort of distorted version of that in the session, but that's neither here nor there. What I'm driving at is that you're sounds like you're grading towards something that I would actually recommend, which is that You get resolve by taking concessions, and then that makes you better able to recover, and that when you have enough to pay for that recovery, you just do. So, and never mind the fiction. Never mind the fiction. We don't even have to call it anything except spend resolve.
Okay.
So and I like the idea that the price goes up. First one costs you 1, second one costs you 2, third one costs you 3. I get that. But the idea being that all you have to do is I spend that point of resolve and wham, I've got my stuff back. Not the same as a respite, but for that purpose. I don't know if your current system of rests and so on is borrowing from the vocabulary of 4th edition D&D, because that has its rests and its encounters and its short rests and its long rests and stuff like that. But they have a pretty sophisticated pacing mechanism for that stuff. And so you might want to study that system, just not to emulate it necessarily, but to see how they did it. And the fact that I'm actually suggesting that you don't need it.
Okay.
But the idea that resolve gets you rests, case closed, done, and the fact that you have to choose to take a concession to get them, and that we've defined concessions at the outset as things that you think are kind of, not really good for your character, not really good for their standing as a person in your mind. That, or rather you stepping back a little bit, this is kind of the way that, if you cared about this person, this is maybe not the way they should be going. That's enough. That's enough right there. You're buying your recoveries with behavior that we have already felt is, or paths of encounters, paths of opportunity, paths of potential consequence, that we consider to be sort of in your character's, they must have some word for it in AA or something, right? Going there, going that way.
Right, yeah.
And then the paths are different. You take your paths, and you're going to get some points that allow you to improve. I think Archaea is still doing a little too many things. There is a long-standing tradition in role-playing games whereby, and it began off paper, it began as a table mechanic, that you could burn experience points for a bonus. Right? It's a long-standing thing. And also that you could burn them for a little bit of director power, basically for luck. You could burn them for luck. You could burn them for, that guy's my uncle. I know that guy. Or, oh, look, I did bring my flashlight. That kind of stuff. You could take your experience points. You could burn them for those things, lucky moments, and you could burn them for a bonus. But you wouldn't have them to improve your abilities with later. Now, that may strike you as a pretty good mechanic. However, it's only good in a couple of cases where there's certain other factors there in the mechanics. As a mechanic on its own, it turns out to be, frankly, not that great. I can name a couple of games where I think it works pretty well, and one of the most important things about those games is that you are handed a bunch in the beginning of the session. Or there's a contingent effect to how much you lose and actually spend. Either of those actually works pretty well. In the games I'm thinking of, like Hero Quest, where you're handed a bunch in the beginning, and there's certain ways to get more during play, then spend on improvement, burn for luck, actually is a pretty good mechanic. But and then also in like Marvel superheroes, if you the amount that you actually have to spend is highly contingent on the rolls. The idea is that if you fail a roll, you can spend enough to fill it in. And then there's other ways which say that it's random. You can say you spend, but you don't know how much. I think Marvel Superheroes is like that. You can spend to fill it in, but there's also, you're also going to spend some more and you don't know how much. So, yes, you can make this roll after all, but look out, really know how much of your karma you're going to lose above that. So what I'm saying is that these techniques of where you choose whether to bank for improvement or spend for your good thing are functional, but they turn out not to be generically functional. If you just do that technique is not generically functional. It's only functional in the context of very specific other techniques. And so therefore I'm always very wary at a game which includes that choice. And I say, all right, what else is going on so that the player isn't basically being screwed out of improving. So in other words, it's a functional family of techniques, but it's also a dangerous one. It's playing with fire.